Ben, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm absolutely fantastic, Maria. Completely buzzing from the conference at the weekend.
Yes, of course, but this will go out probably sometime after the conference. But for those who didn't attend, we've been attending a conference all weekend, surrounded by 200 speakers, and we're both buzzing and both full of ideas, aren't we?
Absolutely inspired, learnt so much and met so many lovely people.
Absolutely brilliant. So now, listen, let's dive straight into you and your area of expertise. So you are known as the Language Strategist, which I think is a wonderful title, a wonderful name. Have you always been interested in language?
It's interesting. English was always my best subject at school. And then for years and years, I just forgot about it. So it was only when I arrived at Boots about 18 years ago to manage writing for the whole business that I suddenly remembered that it was a particular skill. And that was a special opportunity to get immersed in language, in brands, and in tone of voice in particular. So that really got me back into it. And after that, I found it just an extremely useful tool to use in all sorts of businesses in my consultancy. So it's kind of grown from there.
It is useful because we use it every day, everywhere, don't we? So it's a very useful thing to have. So tell me, do you speak any other languages?
Do you know, it's one of my great regrets. I did French and German at school. I went on holiday. I went to Paris when I was a student for a week, and I stayed with a family who had almost no English. And I managed to get by in rough conversational French, but I have to say it's all gone now. And I regret that because I think language is a great way into the soul of a different culture.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I know being Italian, obviously, there are certain things that you can only express in Italian that you cannot express in, and I do like to get, I like to get angry in Italian sometimes. Anyway, that's a different topic.
More impressive.
Yeah. So listen, when you talk about businesses, you talk about businesses having a tone of voice. What do you mean by that, and why should anybody care?
Sure. Well, for me, tone of voice is really the personality of an organization coming through in language. So it's the choice of phrases, the choices of words that express what an organization stands for. So it really comes from your values, from your culture, from what's true. And I think organizations that aren't managing their tone of voice proactively, kind of leaving it up to chance, because language reveals things about us that other human beings pick up on, and they might not be the messages that we want to be giving.
And what's the difference or the balance between language and tone, or is it all one for you?
I don't get too sort of hung up about definitions of different parts of it. I think of tone of voice as the way an organization uses language. So I just use it as a catch-all kind of cover for everything that we do in language. So it's word choice, it's the words that we decide not to use, the words that we do use. It's the way we construct our sentences. It's the way we write our speeches. It's the way I write our strategy. So really everything that involves language, I include in tone of voice. Tone of voice can help us with all of that.
Okay, so can you give me some examples of the kinds of things that you do with organizations to help them, I suppose, one, to discover their tone of voice, because maybe they're not even aware that they have one, I don't know, and to show them why it's important, and then how you help them with, there's a huge question, Ben.
I'll cope. So, yeah, absolutely. So for me, tone of voice is really about who you are as an organization and what you stand for. So what I like to do is try to delve into what an organization is like. So just to give you one example, a few years ago, Ronseal came to me. So for those inside the UK will know Ronseal very well from their advertising about 20, 25 years ago, does what it says on the tin. So they came to me, and the sort of cheeky, chappy tradesman advertising from that period, that had got diluted, that personality had got diluted because they were trying to appeal to the growing army of female DIYers. So the personality had got diluted. They wanted to regain a sense of who they were. And so they asked me if I could help. So what we do is we try to get to what they really are like as an organization. And they had 25 or so marketers in the different regions. So I brought them together. We ran workshops to explore what their personality is. What's true about Ronseal that we can then reflect in language. We came up with all sorts of different personas. We focused in on what that brand personality is, and then we can explain that in what I call tone of voice guidelines, which are really written guidelines that help people to choose different ways of coming up with language in writing and in speech. So that's one example on a small brand that many, certainly people in the UK will know. On a wider scale, an organisation like Vodafone, for example. So Vodafone are fairly global. I started working with them in the UK, looking at European concepts for selling 3G. This is many years ago, because we're now to 5G. And what Vodafone wanted to do was get in touch with a sense of who they are and then reflect that accurately across all of their conversations with customers. So it's in marketing, all the way through to customer service, to leadership, strategy, all of that kind of thing. And the most recent project with them was actually going out and helping the web chat teams in India looking after UK customers. The really interesting thing for them is, you know, us Brits are quite good at hiding what we really feel, aren't we? We're quite passive aggressive. And so we'll not really say when we're unhappy. And this is a challenge for a relational culture like India, because they don't necessarily know when we're really, really, really angry. And many cultures outside the UK don't know when we're really angry. So for them, it was really about training them in empathy and understanding cultural difference. So all sorts of different applications, but it all comes through in language.
I mean, you're talking to an Italian here. You know when I'm angry, I'll tell you. There's no doubt.
I do know, Maria. I do know.
Fantastic. So you and I, when we've spoken in the past, you've said that language is really powerful when it comes to change. And I think I can see that from what you're saying here with regards to, you know, finding your tone of voice. But obviously change sometimes is not just about tone of voice, and there are other aspects to change within organizations. We're always dealing with change. So would you advise companies to think about language when they're leading change as well then?
Absolutely. And actually just last week, a really interesting example came up. So an organization approached me and they're thinking of starting a process of change. The chief exec has spoken to the whole organization and said that there are going to be some structural changes. Now, when I say the term structural changes, what does it make you feel or think?
It makes me think there's going to be some job losses probably, or certainly somebody's going to get promoted and moved around, or it's big. That's big change. Structural is big, isn't it?
Totally. And so what happens is we use euphemisms like structural changes to hide the reality. Now, what they're actually saying is that we need to change the business to keep up with the times. Our market is changing. We need to stay competitive. And so we need to make some changes. If I was rephrasing that, I'd say, and we want to involve all of you in helping us work out what that future looks like. And we don't intend to make redundancies apart from voluntary. And I would be much more direct about what you're saying, about what they're saying to people. So using euphemisms like structural changes actually just puts the fear of God into people, doesn't it? Because you're instantly panic and go, am I going to lose my job? Now that organization is on the defensive and people are worrying about what's going on. And of course, that has an immediate impact on productivity.
Absolutely. So you brought in not only to help people with change and to help people with finding tone of voice, but also to help people communicate.
Absolutely. And I suppose communication is the ultimate expression of everything that's going on within us personally and within an organization. I think an organization that comes from the heart, truthfully, and I don't know many organizations that do, but they do exist, will have a positive tone of voice in the first place. They'll, the way they communicate matches up with their behavior. And really, this is all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to match the behavior of the organization with the communication. And when that happens, it means that the marketing and the customer service match up with the product or the service that's being delivered, and customers are happy.
You know, I'm going to have to ask you now. I have to ask you because you've led me there. I do want to have an example that you think of an organization or a business that does it well.
Yeah. Well, so there's a bank. I'm working with one bank in the UK, a bank that I'm not working with, but I think is a really nice example is Monzo. So Monzo, a startup, I think they're 4 or 5 years old, and they have set their stall out in terms of their tone of voice. And they've actually published their tone of voice on their website. So if you Google Monzo tone of voice, you'll find their tone of voice. And what they say is that they use language their audience uses, that they're focused on what matters to people, that they're transparent about what they're doing and why, and that they're open and welcoming to people. So those are some pretty bold claims, aren't they? So I was really interested to understand whether they're actually following them through in terms of service. So I've joined Monzo several months ago. I've just left one of the big 4 banks and moved my personal accounts over to Monzo because I want to experience whether the service really matches up. And what's really interesting is when you go into the chat on the app, it's all app-based. You go into the app, and the people talk as the tone of voice says on the website. So for people who aren't as obsessive about language as me, does that really matter? Well, I think it does, because I think the language gives us human beings clues as to the service and the product that we're going to get. And those clues are crucial, and we know whether we trust or don't trust a company. Companies feel somehow that they can just carry on what they're doing and we'll believe them, and we just don't, do we? We can sniff out insincerity.
I mean, that's true dedication to the cause, to actually change your bank in order to check that they're fulfilling their mission. Because apparently, I read somewhere, and I'm going to have to try and find it, that more people are prepared to get divorced than will actually change bank. I mean, I know I've been with my original bank since I was a child. People don't change banks, so it's
well, likewise. But so what's interesting about the bigger, older banks? So I was with one of them for 30 or more years, probably. Like you, I think I joined them when I was a student, and they've been fine, but they haven't been anything more than fine. And the thing is that there are new competitors coming into the market who are doing more interesting things. They're using artificial intelligence to help you to budget. They're giving you alerts when you spend, so that you're more conscious about what you're spending. They give you pots so that you can sweep money into pots for holidays or for your house insurance or whatever. And you can make those sort of habits automatic. Now, surely a big bank with all of its intelligence, knowledge, and expertise ought to be able to provide those services, but they're not. And so that's why I think the new brands are really interesting.
That is really interesting. I'm going to go and check some of these new ones out. So tell me, I want to dive a bit deeper into some of the things that you do with companies. And I know you have something called an upside down pyramid. Yeah. Are you able to tell us a bit about that in a short time, or is it?
I am.
You are? Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
It's actually quite a simple concept, and it's the sort of thing that journalists learn in journalist school all the time. So it's an upside down pyramid, and you've got the base at the top. And the base has the essential information that you need to communicate to your audience. The middle of the pyramid has useful information, and the bottom has things that are nice to know. And the idea behind it is, and journalists are trained to do this, as are copywriters, is to put the information that your audience needs to get right at the top, in your subject line, in the heading, in the first paragraph. And the idea from press days is that if you're scanning through a newspaper, if you just read the headline, you get the gist. If you read the first paragraph, you get the story. And if you're interested, then you can read on and you'll get more of the meat. I find this really useful when I'm doing writing training, because it helps people to focus on what is the single most important thing that you need people to get. And the mistake I've come across most often with people when I'm running training is that there are so many things in their head that they want to say, they lose sight of something single-minded that will capture their audience's attention. We're communicating from our own perspective rather than thinking from our audience's perspective.
Yeah, the audience is so important. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the things that you're saying actually applies not only to clients in talking to their customers, but I hope speakers listen to this, because everything you've said applies to the business of speaking. Let's be honest here. All of those things.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Love that. Yeah. So you also have a formula for writing, which you call Afia tone.
Yeah.
And can you give us a little summary of that? And it's a good name, by the way, because obviously it's you created it, it's yours. Tell us about Afia tone.
Well, I mean, there's an interesting story that illustrates the previous point about the pyramid in a way. So I was giving a workshop for a university, some marketing MSc students a few years ago. Now, for 10 or 15 years, all of the work that I've done has been in corporates. And so it's been based on an individual company's tone of voice, which I was involved in creating. For the students, I needed something more generic, something that what is my method that I could apply to anybody, that anybody could use. So I thought long and hard, and I came up with 5 canny questions, and it was something like who, what, where, how, when, or something like that. And as you can hear in my voice, I find it hard to say. And I realized after a few times of trying to present it, I couldn't remember what it was. So the memorability wasn't there. So I scratched my head and I thought, what could it be? And could I make it fit my name? Because then it reinforces the training that I'm giving. So Afia tone is audience. So who are your audience? F is for focus, which is what do you want them to think or feel or do as a result of the thing that you're communicating to them. This applies as much to speakers as it does in writing. Inspire. So what thing is going to hook them in? What's in their interest? What's going to excite them? Arrange then is how are you going to tell that story? So how are you going to arrange those points going back to the pyramid so that they make sense and that so somebody can remember and work their way through them effectively? And the very last step is the tone. So tone of voice, how are you going to sound? How are you going to reflect your brand personality, if you like? So audience, focus, inspire, arrange, and tone. And I've really just been using this for the last 6 months, although I've, it's come out of an approach I've used for probably 15 years. And with a recent client, I now have people saying, have you written your Afia brief? And we're coaching people there. And if they haven't sent us an Afia brief, so they haven't got clear on their audience, clear on their focus and so on, then we can't look at it because we don't know what the context is. So what it does is it helps you order your thinking in a process so that when you get to actually writing, the thinking is much clearer.
I love that. You're very lucky your name wasn't Franzoni.
If it was Franzoni, I'm sure I'd have been able to work make it into some sort of acronym.
Yes, I'll be interested to find out what the Z stands for. But
focus, response, originality, I don't know.
Yeah. Brilliant. So if we're going to say one thing that companies should be focusing on right now to do better, what would you say that would be?
I think there's a growing desire for authenticity and realness from organizations. And I think that the rising brands, the products and services that are popping up, like Monzo, like food brands that seem to be taking over the world, I think what's appealing to audiences worldwide is authenticity and realness. And this is why smaller brands, I think, are nibbling away at the bigger companies. So this need for authenticity, and what's really interesting about language is it reveals whether you are true or not. And we smell, we can read in the nuances of language. It's a bit like body language. You know if somebody's lying, don't you? You can hear the words, but you know they're lying from their body language. Well, tone of voice is a bit like body language in language. So we know when euphemisms are being used, or cliches, or weasel words, or legalistic terminology, that a company is trying to get out of its responsibility or trying to defend itself or cover itself. We know when that's going on. We intuit it instinctively. And so I think the biggest thing I would urge organizations to do is to focus on the language as a tool for getting to what's real. And the reason for that is, as you said earlier, language is baked into every single thing we do. So we write our vision in strategy, in language. We write our strategy documents, our 5-year plans in language. We communicate to all of our teams in language. We lead our town halls using language. All of our ideas come through in language, and all of that language ends up with customers. So whatever you're saying internally within an organization, ultimately it leaks out. You may not intend it, but these things leak out. So language, I think, is a useful way of diagnosing what's wrong in your culture. It helps you to understand where things are breaking down, where teams are not necessarily working together as effectively as they could be, where leaders might be clashing. The language gives you clues as to what's going on there. So I would urge organizations to look at what's really going on, and try to tackle what's real. And then ultimately that will reflect itself in the language that your people feel and that your customers experience.
Fantastic. That's such good advice. I can't believe it. Our time actually is coming to an end, which is incredible. It's just flown past. So I'm going to do what I do with every speaker. Okay. And I'm going to put you in my time machine. And I would like to take you back to when you started speaking and started running your masterclasses and workshops and your consultancy. Knowing what you know now, and with the experience that you have now, what advice would you give to young Ben when he was starting out?
That's such a difficult question. There are so many things. I think if there was one thing, I think it would. So in my early years, I worked in a range of marketing jobs, and I worked for some big companies who seemed to be on a mission to kind of balance out people's skills. So, for example, I joined Whitbread Beer Company many years ago. I was very strong on English and I was poor on maths, and so we wanted to balance out these skills and make you more balanced. And actually, with hindsight, I think what I should have done when I realized that I was so strong on English is to focus in on the thing that you're really, really good at and just get even better at that. Because, we're in increasingly crowded markets. So as a writer, there are so many more people out there than when I went freelance and started building a business. As a speaker, there are so many people coming into the market all the time. And so what gets you booked as a consultant, as a writer, as a speaker, it's being really strongly differentiated, being yourself and being brilliant at one thing. So I would say specialize earlier, get really, really good. That doesn't mean round out your skills, because I love training. And in the last year, I've been learning about appreciative inquiry and agile project management and all sorts of other topics that I love exploring. But major on one thing and get really damn good at it.
I absolutely love that, because I think people should go deep rather than wide. I absolutely agree with you. Ben, thank you so much.
It's been such a pleasure, Maria. Thanks for having me on.